Hello, dear friends. Today with you, we will read a beautiful manga called Mr. Beast. Enjoy watching and do not forget to put a like under the video and subscribe to this channel to not miss new stories. Our new story begins with a servant telling his master that he has been standing in the rain too long. She remarks that they should return to the mansion and that his master can come to the former marquis and marquise another time. Suddenly, the lord turns to his subject and tells him that this was the last time, and we learn that the butler's name is Helena. Also, having a very angry look, the gentleman says that he is never going to return to this place again. He looks quite serious and determined. After some time, the gentleman is already in his office where he is signing some documents. Suddenly, he hears someone knocking on his door, and he allows that person to enter. It turns out it's Elena again. She says that they have some guests. Naturally, the busy gentleman immediately says that he can't accept them now and asks him to send them back. Upon hearing this order, Elena immediately informs her master that a woman has come to them who claims to be the lover of the past marquis. Immediately after these words, the butler lets the woman and the boy into the room of the current marquis, and we see that before him appears a stunningly beautiful girl and an unassuming guy hiding his face. Marquis is of course surprised that Helena has allowed these people in, but he also notes that if he has allowed them into his office, then this woman has good evidence to back up her words. The butler immediately reports that this woman has a Howard ring that the last marquis lost over 20 years ago. But that's not all. According to the butler, the child who came here with this woman is an exact copy of the past marquis as a child. At this moment, the boy exposes his face, and we can see an incredible resemblance between him and the past marquis as a child. At that moment, the new Marchesa put all his affairs aside and looked at the boy and noticed that his face was exactly the same as on his father's portrait on the wall. He noticed that he had the same white hair as his father and Howard's gray-blue eyes, plus they had a ring with the family sign, which also says a lot, new Marquis reflected. I realized that there could no longer be any doubt that these people really came here and told the truth. Then he decides to ask this woman why she was hidden all these years. And now it was shown to him, he obviously could not understand where she was hiding all this time, and why no one knew about her. Then the girl told that the past marquis promised her something. According to her son, Colin is now 18 years old, and Marquis promised that when her son grows up, she will become his concubine, and Colin will be granted the title of second son, changed slightly in his face. But then the girl said that she knew her place perfectly well, and they had never hoped to become concubines with her status. But she would like to be compensated for raising Colin, who had the same Gower blood as the Marquis, while he was going through the hardships of life, and he asked the girl if he understood that she came here because she wanted money. The girl immediately bowed her head to the Marquis and said that it was true and that he would never see her again if he paid her a certain compensation. Hearing these words, the Marquis thought again for a while and said that if the previous generation of Howards made promises, the next generation of Howards would keep theirs. He immediately ordered his butler to compensate this girl, and then Helena decided to do her master's bidding, at which time the girl who had come to them thanked the Marquis for having decided to keep the promise his father had made to her. Suddenly, at this point, Colin realized that his mother was abandoning him in exchange for a financial reward and turned to her. But the woman gently touched her son's face and told him that she had never been a loving mother to him. But because he came from a noble family, she did her best to raise him, despite their hardships. But she says that now that he is no longer of any value, she cannot take responsibility for his future upbringing and life. Immediately after these words, the woman leaves the room to follow the butlers to get her money, while the guy who is still kneeling screams at her back. The woman didn't even turn around to look at her son one last time. And all she said as she walked away was that he had grown up and had to find his own way to survive. The stunned Colin remained puzzled after all that had happened, and as the doors closed in front of his face, he immediately fell to his knees again, and even cried. A great many tears could be seen on his face, for he realized that his mother had abandoned him. But after a while, the Marquis, who had been at his desk all this time, immediately got up and went to his brother. The butler then turns to her master and tells him that as a butler who has been serving his family for 40 years, she is not comfortable saying such things. But he still doesn't think he should take responsibility for his father's mistakes. According to the butler, since childhood, the new Marquis has never turned a blind eye to those less fortunate than himself. But the butler notes that this boy's birth is confirmed, but they do not know what kind of life he has lived, and so he thinks it is unwise to take him in this way. Hearing these words, the Marquis emphasizes that Elena is the only one who cares about him so much. After these words, Elena asks permission to tell the Marquis what the young master was like last week. According to her, he was the same as the day he arrived, and he still refuses to socialize with other people and also hardly eats anything. She emphasizes that he just stares out the window all day long, looking very sad and depressed. Elena also says that even though he's giving up everything to her now, he's still one of the Howards and needs to get a proper education. So she asks Marquis for permission to look for a competent tutor for Colin in advance. At this, she corrects her words a bit and says that better than a tutor, they should find a servant, and even more specifically, a lower status servant. After a while, a carriage pulls up to the mansion, out of which a guy gets out. He is immediately greeted, and it turns out that his name is Ein. It turns out that the guy has purple hair and looks nothing like a member of the aristocracy, but they still tell him they're waiting for him. One of the new Marquis's servants tells Ein that he will take his suitcase to the mansion, but enjoying the beautiful views, the boy refuses to help him. But the girl who came out to meet Ein is not so simple and determined, so she snatched the suitcase out of Ein's hands and said she would take it anyway. The guy who couldn't resist the girl's charge thanked her for her help and started to follow her to the mansion. But he still didn't understand why she was doing it, because he was just a simple servant like her. After Ein and his maid reached the mansion, they were met in person, and Lena greeted him at the Howard family's summer estate. She immediately introduced herself to him and said that she was Elena's butler, and emphasized that she would take him to his room. Naturally, the guy immediately followed Elena, looking around and noticing how everything in the mansion was shining and shining. After Elena brings the guy to his room, she notices that it's not a big room, but she thinks he'll like it anyway, and she tells him he can come to her if he needs anything. Naturally could not expect such luxury, and was quite surprised that he was even given a private room. Then he immediately decided to find out why he was here, and because of this apologizing, he turned to Helena and asked the butler what his duties would be, but she said he would only know when the Marquis arrived in person. Of course, the guy wondered when he would come to the mansion, but then Elena said that he would come back as soon as he was done with his business in another mansion. But for now, Ein could feel at home. Left alone with his thoughts, the guy looks around the room and sees that she has silk on his bed. He was very surprised by this and thought it was very strange, but he decided to look on the bright side of the situation and wondered when he would have another chance to enjoy luxury as a slave. But he still realizes that this is the home of the highly respected Marquis, and so something strange is going on here. But in any case, he realizes that he is very lucky to be treated like this in this mansion. He realizes that he must thank Madame, of course. If he is not thrown out of this mansion, he even began to tremble a little at the thought of it. Suddenly, there was a knock at his door, and it turned out to be another of the maids of the house, one of whom said that she was sorry to disturb the boy, but she thought he had better go out for a moment. Of course, at first the boy did not understand anything, but the maid hurried him up, noticing that a young gentleman had arrived at the mansion. Then all the servants meet the boy, including Elena, who greets the young master. She notices that he must be tired after a long journey, and so wonders if she should ask him to cook dinner or if he'd like to rest first. Of course, the guy immediately says he'd prefer to rest first. Unexpectedly, Ein meets the young master with his gazes. Naturally, the servant is a bit flustered by this, but the young gentleman himself was also very much startled by the fact that their eyes met, and even flinched, which naturally surprised Ein and made him wonder what was going on. Well, their awkwardness is interrupted by Elena, who says that she will take the young gentleman to a room where he can rest, and so she tells him to follow her. At this time, Ein, who was still worshipping, thought about the fact that he and the young master had just crossed eyes. To Ein, it seemed strange. After all, this guy didn't look like an aristocrat. According to Ein, this place is really very strange. After a while, we see how he communicates with the horse. He asks the horse how it feels and if it is better, in response to which the horse makes characteristic sounds. And then Ein says that he is glad that the itch has gone. Then looking at the horse, he says that she is the only one he can talk to here. He even complains that everyone says that they don't need his help. He offered his help to Elena, but she said that he shouldn't do anything. One of the maids told him that it was her job, and the others just avoid him. And because of that, he doesn't even have anyone to talk to in the mansion. That's why he's so happy to have this horse to share his emotions with. Suddenly, the moment he leaned his head against the horse, a dog was heard. The guy immediately turned around, and the tail of the very dog that was barking. He guessed that it was the same dog that had come with the young gentleman. And thinking for a moment that he had not been out of here for days, the boy decided to see what was going on. Opening the door, he noticed that a dog with dirty paws had galloped through the mansion, leaving a trail behind him. Suddenly, it even licked his hand and headed somewhere. When he saw the dog stop and start barking again, the guy thought that maybe the dog wanted him to follow it. It was as if she was guiding him to the young master, going up to the second floor and also going to some room. When the guy reached that room, he realized that it was indeed the young master's room. Door there was open, so he decided to look in and call for the young gentleman, but saw no one. The dog immediately started barking even harder, and the guy noticed that he could see someone's hair on the floor, as if someone was lying there. Naturally, he immediately got excited and quickly went there to see who it was. When he looked at his face, it was impossible to hide the surprise of what he saw. It turned out that there was a young gentleman lying there completely naked, who looked quite exhausted, as if someone had beaten him badly before. In the next scene, a young gentleman touches his daughter's breasts with his face and is pleased to feel warm at last. Suddenly, he was plunged into the bathroom, and then he finally woke up and opened his eyes. But the warmth did not leave him, and he felt much better. When he saw that the young lord had woken up, Ein was glad to see that it was a real relief, although the young lord's face immediately changed when he realized that the boy was touching him. The young lord was startled by what he saw, but Ein began to calm him down and tell him that it wasn't a dream at all. Naturally, Colin immediately tried to hide his body with his hands and wrinkled his nose and asked Ein what he was doing and what he had already done to him. But the very calm Ein bowed his head and said he was sorry to have touched the young gentleman without permission. But he couldn't just leave him on the cold floor. He also emphasizes that to his great fortune, Colin is not injured, and he only has a big bump on his head. At that moment, feeling a headache, the guy touches the bump and realizes that it is throbbing. Also, according to Ein, the young master is better after the fall, but he is still not fully recovered. So he decided that he would help Colin to wash, but the young master was not at all pleased at this turn and immediately ordered Ein to stop, for he said he could wash himself. He also ordered the lad to get out of his room, but Ein is persistent in trying to help the guy because he says he'll be in big trouble if he gets sick again while he's washing. He asks for permission to help, but the young master naturally refuses once again and asks that no one touches him. And to stop the servant, he even splashes water in his face. Ein immediately changed his face and tried again to tell the young master that he needed his help. But the guy started shouting and again demanded that he leave his room, and also emphasized that Ein got what he deserved because he did not leave the room. When the servant saw the young master so disturbed, he bowed to him and said that he was sorry that such an unusual situation had occurred between them, and immediately apologized. As he walked away, the young lord even wondered about everything that was going on. He looked as if he was sorry he had chased away the Ein who was trying to help him. After a while, Ein approaches Elena. He immediately tells her that he would like to ask her for a favor, but we never find out what it is. In the next scene, it appears that it is time for supper, and that he himself has brought the young master the food, and he says that he will wait outside until the young master has eaten, and tells him that he can call him if he needs anything. Perhaps the delivery of the food to the young master was the very favor he wanted to ask of Ein. When the servant was about to leave, the young master said that he was sorry for the incident in the bathroom, and then the servant said that he should not apologize, because it happened because Ein forgot his place. Naturally, these words made the young master a little sad, but Ein went on talking and said that if the young master was sorry, it would be a great joy for him if someone finished his dinner. Because of his desire to apologize to the servant, the young master immediately got up from his bed and headed for the dishes that had been prepared for him. He immediately began to eat what had been made for him, and looking at his dog, he remarked that he had eaten it only out of guilt. For as we remembered earlier, he had refused everything that had been offered to him at the mansion. After a short time, Colin tells Ein, who's standing outside the door, that he's finished. He wondered if the young gentleman liked the food, to which he replied positively. But the questions did not end, and he asked what the guy liked most of all. to which he heard a confident answer that the guy liked the cake most of all. But he was a bit shy and asked that next time he should not have carrots in his meal. Of course, Ein immediately reacted to this request and said that it was definitely impossible because the young master should have a balanced diet. But in order to please the lad somehow, he said that as an exception, he could bring him more cake tomorrow. Hearing this, the young gentleman's eyes glistened, and then Ein asked if he agreed with him, to which he naturally heard a positive answer. The next day, the situation is repeated. And once again, he asks Elena if she would mind if he brought breakfast to the young gentleman. Elena agrees to this, but on the condition that the young gentleman eats all the food exactly as he did yesterday. And she also remarks that she has prepared the dessert as requested and asks if there is anything else she needs. Then, after a bit of thought, Ai says he really needs something else. And after a while, he goes with the food cart to the young gentleman's room to tell him it's time for breakfast. But the young gentleman opened the door as quickly as if he had already been there, for Ein had not even had time to knock. Then, going into Colin's room, Ai says wryly that the young master must have opened the door for himself. But the young master is most concerned that Ein has brought too much food for him this time. After the young master has sat down at the table and the food has been served to him, Ein notices that Elena has paid special attention to the breakfast. But the young master is still surprised that they have prepared too much food for him this time. But that wasn't all. He immediately started looking around, and not seeing the cake he had asked for yesterday, he immediately turned to Ein and asked where he was. But Ein wasn't confused, and immediately asked the guy, how about enjoying dessert outdoors after he ate his breakfast? After the young master had eaten all that had been prepared for him, the dog and he were in the fresh air. While the dog was playing with a butterfly, the young master was eating cake. After he had tasted it, the young gentleman noticed that this thing called dessert was very tender and sweet, and from his face he could see that he liked the dessert very much. Suddenly he offers Ein, who is a servant, to sit down and eat with him, which naturally caused him great surprise. But the servant was not confused, and thanking his master for the invitation, emphasized that he could not accept his offer. The young master. At first, he did not understand why he received such an answer, but decided to ask if he had not received a refusal because he did not like desserts, to which he heard the confirmation of his version. At this point, the young gentleman started scratching his head, and Ein paid closer attention. He immediately emphasized that it looked like the guy wasn't very comfortable with his hair loose. Ein decided to help out. He takes out a comb and asks the guy if he doesn't mind if Ein braids his hair. Already. After a while, the hair on the guy's head was brushed and gathered with a bow. It looked as if the young gentleman had become a girl, while he was concerned that the back strands felt heavier. But Ein, who was able to help his master for a year, noticed that he liked the fact that the young master was no longer bothered by anything. Immediately after that, Colin turned to his servant and asked if he could ask him something. Naturally, the servant said that he could ask him anything, and he immediately started wiping his master's mouth. The young master then asked his servant if he was accustomed to live here, to which he heard that it was not so. The servant had also arrived here recently. This interested my master, and he asked where his servant used to live and what he was doing here. Well, the servant emphasizes that he has had no appointments as yet. He says he was told that as soon as the Marcus arrived, he would be told what he must do. On hearing these words, the young gentleman's face changed very much, and he began to tremble. The excited lad asks if the Marquis is really coming here, and without seeming to care, asks his servant if he can banish his boredom. But Ein and visually reminds the young gentleman about dousing him with water, and says that being doused with water for no reason at all is no better than being bored. But he still sucked up to the young master and said he was very pleased and relaxed to spend time with him, and emphasized that he would be happy to continue serving him as well. Suddenly, the young master tells his servant that his name is Colin, and asks that instead of calling him young master, the servant call him Colin. Naturally, after he said his name, the boy wondered what his servant's name was, and then he heard that his new friend's name was Ein. As soon as he heard that name, Colin repeated it several times to memorize it. At that moment, Ein asked him if he wanted more tea, but hearing himself addressed with the word master, Colin asked him to call him by his name without master. Ein refuses and says he can't do that. Colin then says that he thinks he knows what Ein is really like. The servant again wryly remarks that he can recognize a man in 2 days, When night fell outside, Ein escorted Colin to his room and wished him a good night, to which he heard an equally good wish in return. Walking through the mansion at night, he looked out the window and saw Elena talking to someone on a horse, and in a black robe he immediately wondered who it was. The next morning, Elena came out with an announcement that Marquis had arrived at the mansion last night. Of course, all the servants were very surprised by this, but already assumed that the man could be Marquis, so he just confirmed his guesses. Elena further informs Ein that the Lord demanded that he come to him right now. Of course, Ein had no choice but to comply with the order. Just before entering the Lord's room, Ein realizes that he is finally learning his duties, and also hopes to be as good as the young Lord. Immediately after these thoughts, the guy knocked on the Lord's room. After the Lord allowed him to enter, Ein entered and greeted him. He also said that he was truly honored to serve the Marquis and asked him to call him Ein. After these words, the rather angry Marquis looked at the lad and informed him that he had heard that he had been able to get the young gentleman to eat. On hearing these words, the servant thought of the young gentleman, or says the Marquis. Then he came out of his thoughts and said that the young gentleman began to eat of his own accord. Looking angrily at the servant, the Marquis said that he had lived in the palace of the Grand Duke of Telenoa for 15 years. He suddenly wondered what the servant was doing there. Naturally, Ein immediately answered that question. He said that there he served Max, the elder of the Grand Duchy of Telenoa. According to the Marquis a month ago, the Grand Duke wrote a recommendation to the noble family. Hearing this, the servant was very surprised, and as if he did not even understand what the Marquis was talking about. But Marquis immediately stood up and walked towards him and said that Ein looked like an impeccable servant anyway. Ein was a little frightened, but immediately realized in his head that Marquis was a very tall man indeed. But it turns out it's not that clear-cut, and Marquis is artificially emphasizing that he has a couple of good offers for Ein. Still holding him by the chin, Marquis says that if he's willing to do anything, he'll get what he wants. And after their faces became very close together, Marquis pointed out to the guy what he had to do. It turned out that Marquis had ordered him to come to his bedroom at night. Already after a couple of hours, it was getting dark outside, and then the servant was brushing Colin's hair. The latter in turn turned to Ein and decided to ask him a question. The boy emphasized that he was a little slow and had just noticed one very strange thing. He said he thought the servant was acting strange today and asked what was wrong with his hair because he was going to go to bed. Ein in turn apologizes for the hairstyle, citing that it's just a habit, but his vid looks rather pensive. Naturally, the young master could not help noticing this and immediately asked what was wrong, because according to him, the servant today all day is in the clouds. In order to attract his attention, the guy even hit the spoon on the plate. According to the young master, it may be because today the Marquis arrived, about which he asked his servant directly. The young gentleman assumes that Marquis has said something to Ein and asks him about it, but all he hears in reply is that, according to Ein, Marquis is not very talkative with him. The servant also remarks that the young gentleman should not call his elder brother Marquis. Naturally, hearing the servant call Marquis his brother, it was impossible to conceal the surprise on the young gentleman's face. Colin immediately says he'll never have a brother like that Marquis, and it's as if he's broken, making him sad. The young master immediately asks his servant what makes Marquis his brother. After all, according to him, it has been less than a month since he first saw him, and they share the same blood only half. At this point, Ein thought about the fact that even half but Marquis is his brother, but he doesn't voice his thoughts out loud. He just asks the boy if he's right that he doesn't know the Marquis that well. So the young gentleman asks him why he should know him well, because he used to live in his old house, so he couldn't possibly know him. Realizing that such questions cannot come out of nowhere, and seeing the depressed state of his friend and servant, the young master asks him once again if he is sure that he is all right. But Ein tries not to show it, and says he's definitely fine, while the young master tells him again that he doesn't look so good and should go to his room. Of course, Ein resists this, because he realizes what awaits him, and tells the young gentleman that he should brush his teeth with him. But Colin refuses to do so, and says that he himself can handle this task, and also notes that his friend should not worry, and he should go to rest. At that moment, the young master slammed the door in front of Ein's face, wishing him good night, and saying that they would see each other tomorrow. The loud slam made the servant shudder a little. Heading further down the corridor, Ein realizes that he probably won't be able to rest today, because he has to appear in the Marquis's bedroom. He immediately takes the bow off his arm that Colin made him, because he realizes he can't go like this. When he reached the Marquis's door, he knocked on it, saying that it was he, and was immediately allowed to go into the bedroom. On opening the door, he saw the Marquis, who was evidently sitting and waiting for his arrival. He immediately told the servant to sit opposite him. After they had stood opposite each other, the drunken Marquis looked at his servant and asked him what had brought him here, wondering whether he had come of his own free will or only because of his orders. Then, with his eyes downcast, the servant said that he had no other choice to begin with, because he could not go against his master. He said this as if this was the main reason why he had come here. But the boy also remarked that if the Marquis could give him what he wanted, he would promise to obey his every command. And then it was clear that most of all the servant had come here of his own free will, as the Marquis himself realized. Realizing that Ein had carried out the order while doing it himself, Marquis reminds his judge that he told him about a couple of lucrative offers, then threw some papers on his desk. According to him, these documents recorded everything he had encountered at the Duke's manor. According to Marquis, it hid even the most disgusting and personal things that happened to him, hearing about which the servant's face immediately changed. Marquis goes on to say that he even knows about the escape from Max Telenoa's obsession and also wonders about the services if he wanted it himself. Then the servant says that Marquis is completely right. Hearing these words, Marquis immediately drank all his glass of alcohol and began to tell the servants why he came to this mansion. According to Marquis, the boy is in this mansion only to become Colin's servant and win his favor. He informs that the servant must become so close to him that Colin listens to his every word. And drawing easy, logical conclusions, the Marquis declares that from what he has heard about this servant, this will not be a problem for him. In return, the Marquis promises to protect Ein. He also says that if that's not enough for him, the servant can ask for more, if he wants it. After thinking about it for a while, Ein said the protection he'd been promised would be enough. After these words, the Marquis suddenly drew very close to the servant and said that in that case, their deal would be in force from this moment. Then he suddenly grabbed the servant and, using the physical strength he possessed, threw him right on the bed. After the servant was on the bed, the Marquis towered over him from the back, and with a smirk looking at his subject's face as if to hint to him what was about to happen. Marquis also noticed that when he told Ein to come to his bedroom at night, it was not an order at all, but a simple suggestion, after which Marquis began to slowly expose the boy's stomach. During all that was going on in the room behind the door was suddenly Elena, who heard what was happening in the room at the Marquis, decided to turn around and leave. After everything happened, Marquis poured himself a drink and went to the window and said that he would go somewhere for a couple of days, and told his favors to come to this room at the same time in 2 days. Naturally, I, who liked all this, immediately said that he would carry out this order and also asked for permission to leave him and leave, at which time the guy trembled. Wishing his master a good night, he went out the door and with a stooped gait, holding onto the walls and sighing heavily, went to his room. The next morning, someone knocked on the servant's room. He immediately asked who was behind the door, and then the door opened and it turned out that Elena was there. She immediately said good morning to Ein and told him she had something to give him. Turns out it's new clothes and a box of some kind. Elena also informs the servant that she will further have to give him some errands that he will have to fulfill. After a short time in the room to the young gentleman who is still asleep, he comes in to wish good morning to the dog, and also after stroking it went as well, because according to him the room is very dark, just like midnight. After he had opened the curtains, light filled the young gentleman's whole room, which lighted his face and made Little wake up. Also, besides the light, Ein told the young master that it was time to get up, and he opened his eyes at last, his eyes showing the surprise he felt at seeing his servant. He was surprised that Ein had changed his clothes. Ein in turn seemed to get reacquainted with the young master and told him that today he was serving him. A young gentleman who is puzzled by everything that is happening asks what is happening to the servant, because he looks completely different. But the guy in response tells him that he is the same, then says that they have no more time for chatter, and clapping his hands, says that the young gentleman, as the second son of a noble family, must necessarily attend lessons. According to Ein, the young gentleman will have a lesson in the imperial language in the morning. Then he will learn the status and history of the noble families of the country by heart, and in the evening he will have a lesson in etiquette. Of course, hearing all this, the young gentleman hid under the blanket and said that he would not do any of this. Seeing the negative reactions of his ward, Ein tells him that as a true nobleman he must study, whether he likes it or not, especially considering that it is elementary school. There should be no problem with it. And he also notes that Colin is quite mature, but behaves like a child. Of course, all these words hurt the young gentleman, and he began to take offense under his blanket. But this could not last long, and the servant took the blanket off the young gentleman. Immediately afterward, Colin grabbed his friend's hand, and with a doting look and a smile, asked him not to talk about boring things right off the bat. After these words, because of a careless movement, I fell on the bed, and all began to shake. Of course, Colin was scared and asked his friend if he was okay, but Ein did not answer for some time, and only thought about what to do, because his back began to hurt very badly, and he cannot even stand up. Suddenly, he decides to answer the young master, and grunting tries to say something to him. Seeing this, the young gentleman is very much alarmed and troubled. He once again asks his friend what is the matter with him, and inquires where he is hurt. Ein finally feels better, and reports that he thinks he has a pain in his lower back. Of course, the young master is very surprised at this, and when he asks again, he learns that his servant did not sleep well at night, according to his own words. The young master is very surprised and says he shouldn't have pushed Ein, but he says he'll be better soon, so Colin shouldn't worry so much about it. But Colin's not going to give up and says he's going to help his friend. Then he suddenly grabs him around the waist and jumps on top of him. Colin looks directly at his friend and says that he is very good at it. Of course, the servant tries to refuse to help, arguing that the young master should not do it. After all, he will soon recover. But even before he could finish his sentence to the end, he immediately began to grunt again. Suddenly, he felt better, and it turned out that the young master was very good at massaging, while Colin looked at his servant and said that he was better than he thought, while Ein just lay there and enjoyed the experience. Naturally, the servant asked where the young master could have learned it, and then he learned that as a child, the old man next door was always complaining to him about his back pain. According to the young gentleman, the old man had a bad temper, but he often fed him, so he helped him with household chores and then gave him a massage. It turns out that the old man was always complaining about Colin's poor massage skills, when suddenly his heartfelt words are interrupted by Ein's moaning. The young master got a little scared, and immediately asked if his friend was in pain. He gave a clear answer that he was not in pain, and said that his moaning was because he was very pleased when the young master was giving him a massage. Next, the servant once again carries food for his master, and at the same time he thinks about what happened to Colin recently. It turned out that after a while he came out of the tub, but he looked a little woozy. Having already reached his room at present, Colin says that he is no longer hungry and apologizes to his servant for that. At the same time, Ein wonders if there is anything he can do to cheer up his master. Suddenly, after he left Colin's room, he was surrounded by the other maids of this house who were glowing with happiness, looking straight at him. Naturally, at first, he couldn't understand anything, as suddenly the wide, smiling maids grabbed the guy by the arm and started taking him to some room, saying they all had to go there. A friend did not show him a fully set table for them all, and congratulate him on the official accession to their team of the maids of this house and this noble family. They had been waiting a long time to greet the new servant properly, and they also noticed that ever since they had learned that he was a special guy, they had been eager to talk to him. One of the maids asks permission to introduce herself and says she is Rosalind. Another says her name is Wendy and her twin sister Randy, and they all say that the other maid who went into town on an errand is named Monica. After they've all sat down at the table, Wendy asks Ein if she and her friends really did it without him noticing the preparations. Because according to her, they were very careful in the preparations so that the guy wouldn't suspect anything. Because of such a lavish greeting, the guy got a little nervous and said that he could not even imagine such a thing. According to him, he does not even have words to describe how pleased he is. He says he appreciates it all very much, and he's also very excited to meet the rest of the staff who work at the mansion. And Wendy says that when she told Elena about today's party for him oranges, and also said that there are still a lot of them in the warehouse, I can't eat as many as I want, Rosalind in turn is also very happy about it, because according to her, she couldn't imagine a day when she treats herself to oranges. Hearing these words of praise for this fruit, namely, a little thought and realized what he had to do to impress the young gentleman. After a while, we see a very surprised young gentleman and an orange cake right in front of him. Ein informs his master that today's dessert is an orange cake, which he himself made personally for his friend. Of course, the words that he did it himself surprised Colin very much. He immediately remarks that his servant is unbelievable, and that this cake looks so nice that he can't eat it. He says he can't even believe it, that he has to eat it. Hearing these words, the servant gets down on one knee. I turn to my master and tell him that he will make dessert for him anytime he wishes, if it will make him happier. According to him, using his low skills, he will bake for the rest of his life. After these words, the servant's gaze suddenly changed. It was because those heart-rending words had hurt Colin, who immediately cried when he heard them, but he didn't realize what was happening. And in order to find out what is going on and why his master is crying, the servant is obviously disturbed because his master is crying. He immediately asks what is wrong. After that question, Colin pressed himself into Ein's body, still crying, and holding him tightly began to cry so hard that it became like a howl. Of course, on automatic, the servant hugged his master tightly to comfort him and told him that he didn't quite understand what had happened, but that if Colin told him about it, he would help him. When Colin heard these words, he stopped crying and looked at his servant, then lowered his gaze a little thoughtfully. Ein got very excited about what he saw and immediately asked the young master if he was sick. It turned out that according to the young master, this had happened before, but now it was much worse. Naturally, the servant immediately inquired where Boleth was from the young gentleman, but the latter, instead of giving a clear answer, just mumbled something as if trying to say something. But still, after the boy was able to gather courage, he said that someone was moving. Of course, the servant at first did not realize who he was talking about. Naturally, the servant reassured him and told him that it wasn't a disease at all, so he could finally calm down. The boy was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, and smiling looked at his servant and told him so. Looking at his master, Ein finally noticed how nice Colin was, and asked him if he understood correctly that he was crying for fear of dying. At first, the master did not fully understand what he meant, but Ein asked if it could be because he had not long left to eat his cakes, and he also said that he would be glad if that was the last thing he said, at which point he hugged Colin, who blushed as if he were in love with the servant. Colin suddenly shoved Ein away from him, which made him a little surprised at first. But then he realized that it was probably because he was treating him like a child. Colin then said that he was not afraid of anything, and also rejected the second version that his servant had told him, and asked him to forget the situation altogether. Then the servant said that he would teach his young master how to deal with this problem, and asked him to just let him know about it when this process happens to him again. Naturally, the young master agreed to such a proposal. At this time, even the dog closed his eyes and turned away, then asks the young gentleman if his hair does not bother him, and offers him to braid it again, of course in any color he wishes. After thinking about it for a while, Colin noticed the bow tied around the servant's neck and decided that he wanted to braid his hair blue today. Further, the narration of the story moves us to the city. There, one of the merchants says that he has already shown all the booty for a month. Their booty are beautiful sapphires of blue color. He informs his master that as he could notice, the stones of the highest quality are becoming less and less. According to him, the workers are digging tunnels, but they are no longer so sure that they will find as many sapphires as before. Quite unexpectedly, his master turns out to be the Marquis, who is looking into these stones. After this action, move us to one of the bars of this city. There is a very aggressive man drinking calls the entire family of the Marquis. Of course, one of the people asked to speak him quieter because someone can hear. But this man says that he does not care. He's very upset that he's worked in one of the Howard family caves for years, and now he's being kicked out because of lack of work, and he's even pounding his fist on the table. He says that sooner or later the whole Howard family will go down and end up in poverty and slavery because the past Marquis had a huge card debt, at which point some girl gets up from her table, but the Marquis stops her and asks her to leave the man alone, for his words are not as false as she might think. Noticing the weather outside, Marquis says he thinks it's going to rain. After a short time, it really began to rain very hard outside, and in the mansion, the young gentleman and his servant are studying lessons. At which time, the young Marquis naively says that he can't go on like this, but Ein keeps up with him and tells him that he still has to study. But the young gentleman is still completely unwilling to do so, Seeing that it is completely useless to continue the lesson, he informs him that for the first lesson he thinks that the text of knowledge they have received today will be enough. He also informs him that they will end here. Naturally, this news could not fail to please the young gentleman, who immediately looked out from behind the book that was in front of his face. Immediately says that tomorrow he will still ask him exactly and characteristics of all the Lord what they have learned today. Hearing this, Colin again placed the book on his face and naively showed his tiredness from all this. But the servant was not as simple as it might seem. He immediately went to his master and took the book from his face, then asked him if he would like to go to the bedroom now. After they had gone to the young master's bedroom, the servant blew out all the candles so that the young master could go to bed. He covered himself with a blanket up to his head, and being a little frightened, asked his servant if there would be lightning tonight. To answer this question, the servant came as well, and looking outside and seeing the very heavy rain, said that the weather looked like it might lightning strike a couple times. After these words, he turned to his master, but he jumped up from his bed and immediately asked him if he thought he had asked because he was afraid, thereby giving away his fear. The servant, of course, immediately said that he had not even had time to say a word. Then the young gentleman lay back on his bed, and turning his back to the window, said that he was just really annoyed by the lightning strikes, and he couldn't sleep when something was annoying. He was still trying to hide his fear. Then the servant thought that lightning strikes are really annoying. And in addition, maybe because of the humidity in the house, there will be a lot of strange sounds, such as creaks. In addition, it turns out that this night both the master and the servant were alone in the mansion. Then the servant smiled a little and told his master that he would go to his room at once, whereupon Goodnight decided to go away, but hearing no answer from his master, he still decided to address him. Naturally frightened, Colin froze with fear and couldn't even answer anything. He just clutched the blanket in his hands and listened to every creak in anticipation of the lightning. But Ein decided to go to his room. He changed his clothes and thought it was too much to tell him that they were alone in the mansion, and there might be strange noises mixed with lightning. He decides to check on his master in a minute. Suddenly, there is a rumble of thunder outside, and the thoughtful servant asks himself if he has understood correctly that lightning has struck somewhere far away. He hopes that it will not reach here, as suddenly there is a sudden, very strong lightning strike outside. Because of the thunder that struck right after the lightning, even the servant was very much frightened, for he had never heard such incredibly strong thunder before. Naturally, Ein realizes that perhaps the young gentleman might be very frightened, and so he should check him out. But he didn't even have time to do that before suddenly, young master himself flew out to his room and embraced his servant and clung to his chest. Ein immediately decides to help his master. He asks that they go to his room and informs him that he will stay with him until he falls asleep. Of course, the boy agrees to this and nods, while shivering violently and clinging to his favors. At this point, Ein realized that he should not have teased Colin, because by doing so, he made him even more afraid. Because of the realization of this thing, he immediately apologizes to him. Sometime later, they were already in Colin's bed, and the servant was embracing him and pressing him to his bosom, while the young gentleman himself blushed very much because of some awkwardness which he felt. Ein also says that he is well aware that it is disrespectful to share a bed with him, but he is trying to make the young master feel better. So he asks him how he feels now and if he feels better. Naturally, Colin answers that everything became much calmer, as suddenly on the street very strongly struck thunder that frightened the boy even more. He again began to tremble, and also even more attracted to his favor. Ein began to stroke him again to calm him down, but he did not decisively remove his hand from the boy, for he remembered that he did not like it when he treated him like a child. But this time Colin didn't push him away from him, and even asked him to continue stroking him. At this point, the young master's face looked as if it would even excite him a little. Colin began to feel as if he had been reborn, and his whole body was still trembling. Then he also turned to his servant, and asked the servant if he had understood correctly that Ein and the others were also doing this. Then Ein said that he was doing it in a slightly different way, which surprised Colin very much, who even began to shake. The young master immediately asked, "Is it true that there were other options as well?" Ein remarks that this is indeed so, and says that he will teach the young master this a little later. Then is naturally glad of it, and said that he would wait for that moment. After a while, a noise is heard in the street, a carriage returning, and a great deal of talking. At which time, the young gentleman is having a new lesson with his friend. Naturally, hearing all that shit street noise, the young gentleman asks what's going on there and why all the noise. Then the servant says that it is Helena who has returned to the mansion with a great deal of luggage and workmen, and he also says that he will ask her what is going on here, while the young gentleman will have to continue reading. Naturally, Colin doesn't like all this, but he still says wryly that he's looking forward to his friend's return, and plops down on the bed. So, yes, to keep the guy relaxed, Ein says he'll check on him on his return. After he left with a loud slam of the door, Colin was finally able to relax and take a little break from reading. When the servant went outside, Elena said he'd come to her just in time, as she said she'd bought some furniture and stuff from the main house. She said her plan is to replace some of the furniture in the young master's room, so Ein should make sure the young master stays occupied until they finish the job. Naturally agrees, and asks why Helena has brought things from the main house here. Then he learns from the butler that the gentleman has decided to stay here indefinitely. She said she was afraid that it might take longer than expected, and so it became necessary for her to ensure the comfort of both gentlemen. At this point, Ein thought about the whole situation and wondered if he was really going to stay in a suburban house instead of a metropolitan mansion. Noticing the guy's pensive state, Elena asks him if he's feeling well. Naturally, he doesn't understand what she means at first, but then he realized from the look in her eyes, a little embarrassed. He realized that Elena knew everything and told her that he was perfectly fine. According to Elena, this pleased her very much, and she assumed that the Lord was planning to return earlier than expected. Hearing this, the servant began to tremble. But then Elena supplemented her monologue by telling the boy to come to the Lord's room at the same time as before. When night has fallen outside and it is time to meet the Marquis again, the servant heads to his room at the previously designated time. When he finally reached the Marquis's room, he met Elena there and was very surprised. But Elena knew he was coming and greeted him. She immediately informed him that the gentleman had just arrived and was taking a bath, but she still opened the door for him so that the boy could enter the room. Turns out there's more to it than that, and Marquis asked Elena to tell him to come to the bathroom. When the servant reached the room he was to enter, he immediately knocked and obtained permission from the Marquis, at which time the Marquis himself was enjoying a bath. Suddenly, the young gentleman woke up to his dog making some noises, looking at him. He asked Jack if he wanted to go to the bathroom, and then the dog started barking. Naturally, the guy decided to take his dog to the toilet and staggering headed for the right place, at which time the dog immediately rushed after him. After the boy went out into the corridor, he heard unusual sounds from the room of his older brother, the Marquis. He realized he was hearing sounds that sounded like moans, so he decided to move closer and listen to what was going on. But Elena noticed him and turned to him. Naturally, Guy couldn't expect Elena to appear behind his back, so he was very scared. But Elena immediately asked him to go back to his room. Next morning, when the young gentleman awoke, he saw Helena in his room. She informed him that today she would serve him, and bowed. According to her, the boy woke up earlier than usual and is still getting ready for tomorrow. She asks him if he would like to wash first, but the confused young gentleman says he doesn't want to do that and prefers to sleep a little longer. Elena says it's fine and she'll serve him breakfast in exactly 1 hour, and so now wishes Colin a good rest. But the boy doesn't quite understand what Elena is doing in his room, so he immediately asks her where Ein is now. Then Elena tells him that Ein is currently serving the master, so she doesn't think they'll meet today, so he'd better rest now. But the boy went back into the corridor and pressed himself against the door of the Marquis. He realizes that he definitely heard something there last night. He realizes that the noise comes from the Marquis's room, and he has certain thoughts in his head that he finds hard to believe. The boy decides to go into this room and check what is going on there and who is making those strange noises. When he managed to enter the room, the boy did not create a single gram of noise, so he remained unnoticed. But in return, he learned everything that was going on there. And so, because of the fright, he decided to leave the room of the Marquis very quickly. The next morning, Ein wakes up in his bed again with trembling legs. He feels very tired. Venda is happy to see her colleague again and asks him how he is feeling, but Ein did not quite understand the question. After all, no one should have seen him leave the room. He stared at Venda and asked the question again. Then Venda said that Elena told her that he wasn't feeling well today, and also emphasizes that everyone was very worried, and no one even went near his room to get a good night's sleep. According to her, he looks very tortured, and that's why she thinks it's not normal that he's walking around like this. Ayn immediately thanked Venda for his concern, and said that he was already feeling good, so he thought he should probably visit the young master. So he wondered where he was now. Wenda says that the young master is most likely in the stables, which is where the servant is headed. Upon reaching the stables, Ayn could meet a young master who was stroking the same horse that the servant himself had stroked before. Then they left the stable together, and I went outside to enjoy the weather. The boy was glad that they could find a plaid in the stable, and after Ayn had spread it on the ground, he invited the young gentleman to sit down on it. The boy looked completely different from usual, and the servant noticed it and wondered what was wrong with him, because he thought he looked different. Then the boy was the first to strike up a conversation and asked his servant how he was feeling. Then Ayn said that he was fine and he was only a little cold because the weather was getting colder. The boy was surprised by this answer to his question and asked if it was all true. Ayn was not confused and said that this was really all. But he also said that he felt like he was getting sick more often, which was strange to him because he was in very good health. Then the boy stood up and said that all the words of his friend are lies, but the servant refutes this. And then the boy comes even closer to his favor and begins to stare at him. He immediately asks the servant to teach him what he promised earlier. Already in the mansion, it turns out that today's dinner is meat steak, medium rare, which is cut into slices. Marquise is at the same table with the young gentleman, while Elena offers them to enjoy their meal. Realizing that a certain tension sagged in the air between the Marquis and the young gentleman, Ayn thinks about the fact that it was as if the room had run out of air, and he had just watched them at the time and experienced similar tension. This makes him wonder if the young gentleman is all right, for you can tell by the look in his eyes that he doesn't really like the whole process in which he is involved. Turned out before dinner, the young gentleman made a scandal. He did not understand why he should already know with the Marquis only because of his request. But he is reassured and told that it is customary for nobles to gather and dine together. At the same time, he is also told that he was only allowed to eat in seclusion because Mr. worried about his condition. But Colin does not stop and asks why they should dine together so suddenly. But Ayn doesn't answer that question and asks the guy if he remembers table etiquette. Then the action moves back to the table where Marquis is dining with the guy. He looks at the food very excitedly and mentally apologizes to his friend, realizing he doesn't remember anything about table etiquette. The guy started to look at Marquis because he wanted to repeat everything after him. But Marquis, instead of having dinner with him, only drinks, so the guy has nothing to repeat. Then, having no other choice, Colin decides to do as he wishes, so he decides that he will eat the one that lies closest to him. Seeing this, the servant immediately shuddered, realizing that the boy does not do everything as they taught him, at which time Colin tries to eat the steak. But it becomes unclear to him why the cost is so tiny. He suggests that perhaps the nobles think it's enough. The boy continues to eat as he pleases and decides that he should get it over with and go upstairs to his room. Seeing that his ward once again fails to observe table etiquette, Ayn is disappointed. At this moment, the Marquis himself addresses the servant, and a little angry asks him who he thinks he is. Naturally realizing what he has done, the servant immediately kneels down before his master and apologizes. Then the Marquis emphasizes that this servant's only duty is to serve his master, that is Colin, while he also says that the guy eats like a stray dog who has been starving for 3 days before. Hearing these words, even the young lord blushed very much. But Ayn, in his defense, said that he was really sorry that this was happening, and said that he was taking full responsibility for the improper performance of the work. But the Marquis was not going to stop, and angrily looking at his favor, asked if he was ready to take responsibility for humiliating the nobleman. Hearing these words, the young gentleman immediately jumped up from his table and said loudly that Ayn had done nothing. The Marquis calmed down a bit and said they would take a break, with Helena walking over to the young gentleman and asking him if he was okay.